So today on the Creative Lens, we're going to be talking about creativity and more specifically exploring creativity and creative concepts that both Wade and myself have encountered as creatives in our lifetimes so far. So we'll kick the episode off today with Wade. How are we doing?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. How are you? Nice chilly Friday morning.
Yeah, man, all good for a Friday morning, and it's a pretty open topic, creativity. It's a tough one to sort of try and nail down into some like hard concepts because of the abstract nature of it, but we're going to do our best today and jump into it. So all right, how about we kick things off with talking about from our own perspectives of what is creativity, and I'll frame this question to you, Wade. What is creativity specifically to you?
Oh, yeah. So I would like to, just to emphasize what you're saying too. I think creativity can mean different things to different people. But to me, I think it's just the idea of creating something, not something necessarily physical, but using my brain to create something, whether it's, some form of information or, something unique or something that is basically my own personal creation, as opposed to copying something or just relying on like my unconscious mind to talk, that kind of thing. Like I could create something very artistic in speech, or I can just simply talk the way I normally talk. So, but moving on to levels of creativity, I think creativity to me means having an idea and creating something that you can then show other people that they can then basically appreciate. To me, is what creativity is in a nutshell. What about you?
I can't fault that perspective. But for me, I think when I think about it, or I'm thinking about it specifically from the idea of creativity in art and what is art. And for me, at this point in my life, art is effectively storytelling. And also on the other side of that equation, there's creativity, like you said, in all aspects of life. Like you could argue that what we're doing right now is a creative situation because we're having a conversation which isn't very scripted. It's a free-form conversation about creativity. But from the other perspective, you could look at how an engineer might solve a problem with a bridge, for example, just as one of the several ways in which someone can either solve a problem or tell a story. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but that's how I would sort of lop every sort of artistic endeavor. I'd put that into the basket of effectively it's just storytelling, whether it's a movie, a piece of art, a piece of music.
Man, I can definitely vibe with that, because I feel like too, really highly appreciated art is someone who takes their creativity and channels it through a unique skill set. And I think sometimes art isn't always as creative as it might sort of come across, in the sense that I believe someone who restores an old car is an artist, because for one, they've chosen the car they want to restore, and they might make little changes as they go. But to separate that, if someone paints a car and they paint something unique, then they're using their creativity to be very unique about the car. But if someone is looking at, okay, now I want to restore the engine and I need the following parts, then it's still, in my opinion, it's still an art form because of the choices you've made, but it's relying more on the skill set and has less creativity. But the entire product, in my opinion, is art.
Yeah. No, 100%. That's it. It's one of the beautiful things about life, and I think, and this is another crackpot theory of mine, is that anything that's sort of creative, or whether it could be a hobby that people undertake, like say it's something like mountain biking or rock climbing, or say people love meditation or spirituality and things like that. And like if you imagined a circle, right, and the middle of the circle is a bullseye, and like for someone who's restoring a car, and the bullseye is flow state, being aware and being in the moment, and people can hit that bullseye coming from any angle of the perimeter of the circle, if that makes any sense. It's regardless of the task, but the rewarding thing is like people who take up an instrument or take up painting or any insert task. That's one of my crackpot theories that I haven't really elaborated on too much further than that, mate. But I guess one thing I wanted to talk about that I'm curious to know your perspective on is your own experiences with creativity, because it's such an abstract, it's not something that you can, like, there's an Andrew Huberman podcast which we've been listening to, which talks about what's going on at a biological level from a chemical perspective when creativity has been undertaken. But in terms of, if you maybe take it to the point where we're sounding like pseudoscientists, but the act of being creative, like, where do your ideas come from? How do you get ideas? Like, could you explain your a process of you being creative and that flow of inspiration and how you follow it and make something?
Oh, yeah. Well, definitely. Like, I would say there's always a prompt to some degree for me. So maybe I'm just listening to music, watching TV, and there's an image I like, and I want to take that image and not necessarily recreate it, but I want to take the same power of that image. So when I was drawing, I used to love reading comic books, but I wanted to see characters I'd created or characters I loved. Like, we used to play Mortal Kombat a lot when we were kids, you know? So like seeing there might be a comic book where there's a certain type of punch in a frame or something that looked really cool. I was like, well, what would happen if I had Scorpion doing that? And I would like to go ahead and draw that with my own little flavor of, I love to see these little bits and pieces on there, and kind of make my own version of that with two different subjects. And then of course, as a professional, the prompt could be something I think people would like. I think people seem to be into this. What can I create from that? Or it could literally just be a client saying, I need to market this product. And then I'm like, oh, well, I get ideas and visual cues and things I think would work well with that. And I try to piece it all together. So usually there's some minor prompt that gets it started. And it could be something as simple as one thing, or it could just be the idea of a certain concept being applied to something, if that makes sense.
Okay. So is it fair to say that if you're doing something, whether it's of your own, say, free time, where you might be doodling, who uses that word these days, but sketching something, in your own free time, as opposed to a professional job where, as a graphic designer, does your creative process change?
There is a bit more of a system. First of all, I just want to add that if I have been doodling logo ideas and I show them to a customer, I make sure I let them know that I don't want them to touch that doodle.
But
so, no,
risque.
a little bit risque. No,
go to bed, kids.
No, there's definitely a process. I feel there's a creative process, which it's funny. The two don't really mix in a way, but they also kind of do, because the creative process creates the prompts and creates certain things that I can piggyback to actually fuel my mind to be creative, as opposed to just sitting back going, where do I start? So literally, like with a customer, if they wanted a website and I was going to create this cool website, and I'm literally creating something from nothing here except using a few tools to do it, I'm like, well, what do you want the website to do? So there's the purpose, and it's the same when I'm doing a flyer or a business card. And for a lot of people, to give you an idea, most of the time it is for brick and mortar businesses who just want people to contact them. So my creative process goes, okay, if I need you to contact them, how do I convince people to contact them? And this is sounding very non-creative, but I'm getting there. And I lay down those pieces of what I need the product to do, the product being the final thing, that the art that my creativity is building. And then I'm like, cool, can I make it fun, or do I want to make it serious or scary, or how can I use imagery, and imagery even being very short phrases, even though something like stop this on a YouTube thumbnail is words, it's also imagery because your mind just is drawn to it. So literally coming up with, what do I need to communicate? What story do I need to tell? And then I can go, cool, if it needs to be scary, like say I'm doing a website for an insurance salesman, which I've never done, but, all gloom, you want to create some really horrible looking situation and but then show that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So it's like, how do I get that gloomy look while also showing that there's light at the end of the tunnel by going for this product, or, that kind of thing. From a professional standpoint, that's kind of laying out the pieces and seeing how can I use my creative skill set and my understanding of imagery and design to get people to understand what they do at a glance.
How to tell that story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. So even though your parameters or your objectives, I guess the boundaries in which you operate might be changing, the creative act is still taking place. It's just whether as opposed to you doing something of your own, you've got, if with a work one, you've got that, okay, these are the parameters I need to operate within. Is that sort of a good summary?
Yeah. It's just because I need to achieve a result, but I'm also creative. The result really has to come first, but the creativity is what fuels it. So, yeah, you kind of need to combine the two. Whereas limitation is something that all creativity has to a degree, even if you decide to find ways to go beyond it. So if you're a painter, the canvas and the paints are pretty much your limitation. And if you have an idea of what image you want to create, whether it's abstract or not, then there are limitations. If it's abstract, then you can't just paint a camera exactly the way it is. I'm saying that because I'm looking at a camera. Whereas if it's non-abstract, you have to be able to, or somewhere in between, there's a limitation as to where that needs to go. But at the end of the day, you can have a mixture of both. Or if you look at that limitation and go, like I've seen those pictures where someone will create a painting on canvas, put a frame on it, but then add like a sculpture of a hand coming out. And that's thinking beyond the limitation. So, but the limitation exists. It's just that you don't have to adhere to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of the medium.
Yeah.
There's a really creative, I'm still in touch with him, a guy I went to school with. And I remember he was in one of his final senior artworks was his painting. He painted, like the canvas. He took the canvas off the frame and painted on the frame and handed in a hollow frame with paintings all around the edges of it.
That's cool.
Super cool. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Really lateral thinker, that dude. That's cool, man. I guess from my perspective with creativity, this might sound a bit woo or like borderline spiritual type of thing, but for me, I've had experiences where, like, if we're talking from my area of music, where from a songwriting perspective or a composition perspective, something just falls out of you, comes through you, and you don't know where it came from or how it came through you, but it came through you. It passed through you. Like, sometimes you just write a song in 5 minutes and you're like, where the hell did that come from?
Yeah, sometimes it writes itself type thing in your head.
It's just a total subconscious operation of something. Is the best way I could describe it. And then there's times where you'll have glimpses of that in a songwriting perspective, where you might get a melody or a hook or a line that you really like. And then you have to spend time with it and get to know it and let the idea almost reveal itself to you over time. Kind of the analogy I liken to this is like an archaeological dig. You might find something, right? And then you kind of just like, you can't force it. You have to spend time with the idea for it to present itself. And it's almost like I'm trying to think of a word that's not manifesting, because I know I find that a bit cringy, that word. But do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes you can see, or from my own experience, you'll be working on a piece of music, and when we're talking about like songwriting, arranging, production, so let's just talk through those steps first. Songwriting is you're establishing the idea, a sketch, a theme of an idea, right? Arranging is you've got the foundational elements of your song taken care of in the songwriting process. With arranging, you're starting to sculpt the melodies and how everything interacts with one another. So you're fine-tuning that up. Production is when you're implementing the arrangement in a recording setting. Okay, so you're producing. This is only my own terminologies. I'm sure people have different perspectives, but this is just my own workflow as well. So you're in a studio and you're actually working with engineers to sculpt and bring this idea in, like you're printing the idea, so to speak. Okay, so that's like songwriting, arranging, and production. The songwriting phase is always very, like I described to you, it either comes like a bolt of lightning or it comes in dribs and drabs, and you've got to spend time and let the idea evolve. But it's almost like a thing, coming back to the manifesting idea, where you're kind of visualizing the vibe or the theme of what you're trying to express, and just having trust that it is going to present itself to you when it's ready to be presented. So I've had situations where I've been working on a specific piece of, like, I remember one composition I wrote like the first half of it in like 2 minutes, right? And then it took 6 months to finish off the other half of it, but it didn't come in 6 months of just chipping away. It came from a situation of complete writer's block, and then you get to a point where it's just like you just give up on the idea, and then it just comes out.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then other situations where you've got an intention in your mind of what you would like to create, but not the finer details. You've got like a vision in the distance is how I would describe it. And then you wake up the next morning and this thing just falls out of you. Like first thing that comes into your head, no idea where it came from.
Oh, I mean, I definitely know what you mean.
Yeah, that's a pretty long rant, but
oh yeah. I was gonna say, well, this is a podcast, so you're supposed to be talking. So
I just don't want to be hogging it. That's all, dude. You know.
No, it's all good. I feel the same sometimes. Yeah. I feel like I talk for ages. Everyone's probably getting sick of my voice now. But I will say one thing, and I got a bunch of things to say actually, because I think that's a very insightful way of looking at it. And I feel like if you've ever, there's two things I want to mention first. One, have you ever been driving in your car and you're listening to a song in the car? You pull up, you get home, you get wherever you're going, and you turn the car off midway through the song. And for the rest of the day, your head's finishing off that song. You're going, do, 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 do. And you're like, oh, Jesus. And then you get in the car and you go, that's why. I was listening to it when I pulled up, and then I stopped it and my brain wanted to finish the song. I feel like when there are different types of people who are, some are creative and some, I would say more creative and less creative. Everyone has a degree of it. And it's like a muscle. It's like, if I go to the gym and I do only bench press, I'm going to have these massive pecs, but everything else is probably going to be underdeveloped because I don't do anything else. But if I exercise a creative muscle, the brain, obviously, I can sit down, I can do it consciously, but the unconscious brain is going to be making connections without me. That's kind of how I feel. So when you're creating purposely all the time, it's like your brain is problem solving because it maybe can't tell the difference. So it's like, I know exactly what you mean when you're working on a project. I'm like, how the hell am I going to finish this? I don't know what to do next to make this work. And then you come back the next day and you go, boom, it just comes out. And, I feel like there's a degree where your brain picks up. It's like if you've got a mathematical brain and you can sort of figure things out consciously, but then after a while, someone says 8 + 8 and you go 16. So because you just know the answer, or you understand the concept of how to formulate the answer. And then creativity, obviously, it creates those connections, I feel like, and builds it in the background. So then, like you said, if you're too conscious, you almost have to step back and let your unconscious mind uncover the idea. It's kind of like that your unconscious creativity is the fossil, and your conscious mind can sometimes be the ground above it type thing.
Well, I really agree with that. And it doesn't really depend. It doesn't change the result, but I guess I like the idea of, I love wonder in life, like mystery. And I kind of never want to know how creativity works, because you can be creative, like you can try and come up with a million different uses for a teacup, but it's not a meaningful expression of it's not an artistic expression, in my opinion. And the whole thing of have an artistic expression, like where something enters your mind or your vision, and you encounter it in space and time. The idea is something you want to chase down and explore. And I love that concept of wonder, where you're just spending time with an idea and you're chasing down stuff, and you're not necessarily creating it, but it's an idea that's coming through you. So it's not, I think really high level, meaningful, creative stuff in my own experience where I've written something, I'm like, far out, man, I'm proud of that. It's never been a conscious exertion of creativity. To take that a step further, when I'm talking about, so like the arrangement stage and the production stage of music, that's kind of can be perceived, not always, but it can be a little bit tradesman, like you're talking about with your graphic design, because you've got, particularly if you're arranging someone else's piece of music, you've got to listen to it and hear what you hear in that song, and then how to best complement that idea that you're given. Or production, you're trying to help deliver the idea in the artist's vision as best as possible and as true as possible to their desire to create something. So it's yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and like some people might find that a bit woo, like your ideas are just coming to me, but you kind of have to have your antenna up, as Rick Rubin says. Like he's a record producer, if you're not aware, but and you got to be listening to the ideas for them to find you. I think like you got to have your antenna up, just like hoping and be in the game.
Yeah, I literally, I know exactly what you mean. There's actually a now I don't know if a lot of people would know this. But like, so I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan, and he is actually, everyone thinks about like, the movies or the martial arts, mainly the martial arts, because he was an extremely skilled martial artist, but he's actually quite a competent artist as well. I've seen drawings that he has made, and they're pretty solid.
Really?
But the concept, yeah, and the concepts he's carried over from art to martial arts and back and forth. There's a book I've got called Striking Thoughts. It's mainly just quotes and things like that. But it's very clear to see that everyone has heard of, there's an interview that Bruce Lee did, I won't say everyone, where he says, be like water, which is the idea of emptying your mind and letting things take over. But he had another saying in that same interview, which is something like, you want to take the... one is natural instinct, one is control. When you put the two together in harmony. But he also, so that is the idea of, and I'm getting to the artistic point of this in a sec, is when you're training in martial arts, so you're training to punch and kick, do that kind of thing, you want to get to the point where it becomes unconscious. So that then when you are forced to use those tools, you don't think about using them, they just happen. And like he says, when you want it, it's there. And he applies that to expression. And he says it's the art of expressing the human body, because you switch off and the body expresses itself unconsciously. So someone starts attacking you, you unconsciously trigger your defenses and your attacks, and therefore you're able to see the whole picture. He then applies the same thing to art. And he says that art is a form of expression, and the ultimate form of art is pure expression. And don't get me wrong, this is his definition. I'm not saying he's right and everyone else is wrong. The idea that he would say the purest form of art is where someone is almost in a trance-like state, completely unconscious, and their body is expressing the art and creating. So it's almost like a direct line to that internal thought. And I always thought that was really interesting, because obviously that's one way of dealing with it. Sometimes you have to be conscious to solve problems, but there's always that unconscious creativity, which I think is the strongest form of creativity, bubbling up in the background. So finding ways to access that and getting used to doing it, I think is a very interesting way of looking at creativity and art in general, is just like focusing on expression, because you've got ideas unconsciously that want to get out. And if you can get to the point where you're just used to expressing, then they come out.
I think this is a perfect time to segue into talking about some creative concepts, because I think that's sort of where we're going with this one. And like, let's jump straight into what you just said there. So how does, like, just from my own perspective with music, one concept I did was with composition specifically, because when you're learning an instrument, you're learning a lot of other people's music, and there's a technical component to it. And not that's not expressive or creative, but it's just
skills, learning skills.
But with creating music, or in my perspective of it, I spent a lot of time like analyzing music which I liked and that moved me, and I found really interesting. And I would analyze that, transcribe it, find out what's going on with that piece of music, and then I would take what I liked and spend the next week every day trying to write that idea into a piece of music which I wasn't jazzed about or emotionally invested in, but it was the exercise of learning that tool, that form of expression, and being able to do it to the point where it just felt really natural. Excuse me. And if you do that X amount of times and make that a process that you continually repeat, you're building a repertoire of skills like you're talking about before, like something which becomes unconscious that you just know how to do. So when inspiration does strike you, you've got a bank of ideas and skills in which you can use to express, and just even hopefully from that unconscious perspective where something can just fall out of you. And I think that's a great create concept to not only learn, because if you want to learn something, you look at who's doing it well, and look at what they're doing and how you can emulate and pick up those ideas. And then you want to be constantly working at your craft to be able to have proficiency in executing those ideas. So that's a really important creative concept, I think. Do you want to add to that, Matt?
Absolutely. I think that there's this. I'm kind of going to do the reverse of that. I feel like sometimes it's good when you just kind of want to be creative in a way that's very natural, that you'll simply draw upon your skill sets and everything and create something that you're really good at. But I also think that you need to consciously challenge your creativity a little bit and go, okay, I'm good at this, but I'm not good at that. And then go, I want to actually funnel my ideas into this skill I'm not that good at. So for me, like, I've been drawing for 35 years, pretty effectively. Every now and then I just think I've never drawn this kind of object. So I'll just go, I'm going to try and draw it, and things like that. And there's still some creativity in there, even if you're not looking at the object and you're trying to remember it. I feel like there's that degree of, you need to establish skills, and that quite often is replicating or emulating something. But every now and then, sometimes creating your own skill set, like, okay, I've never drawn a car before, so I'm going to draw a car how I'd like to draw it. And then you go, some stuff I'm not happy with. And the more you do it, then you know what I mean? Like, so I feel like, there's so many ways to build the skills. And in the beginning, to use the tool, you have to emulate someone. But once you've got enough understanding of the tool, you can expand upon it in ways that don't require emulation. And also, you know what I mean? So there's so many different paths once you get started. But at the start, it's simple. And then the rest, like, you can take whatever path you want.
Well, let's kick. I got a few ideas there. Let's kick this around. So to sort of elaborate a little bit further on what I was talking about have you heard of a book called The War of Art?
Oh, I haven't.
You haven't? It's Stephen Pressfield or Pressfield. I've potentially got his name right or wrong in both of those options. Excuse me. Anyway, he's got a book called The War of Art, obviously, but the main concept of that book there's a line I really love from that book, which is the pro goes to work. So if you're a creative and you want to be professional, you have to sit down and be disciplined and work on your art. Like, not everything that comes out of you is going to be good, but you sit down and write. And it's like the idea of having a tap. You spoke about that creative muscle before. Like, the more you are forcing yourself to write and be creative, tell stories, whatnot, you're encouraging that flow of ideas where you're not filtering it consciously. It's just coming out of you. And that's kind of what that idea I was talking about before, where that sort of kind of leads itself to, or comes from rather, where it's you're developing skills at the same time of just forcing yourself to write and get good at finishing something. Because, like, if you force yourself to go, okay, I've got 2 hours to write a song, it doesn't have to be good, bad, or indifferent. It's just got to be a finished song with a verse, a chorus, a couple of melodic hooks, lyrics. 2 hours, go. You get good. Like, you're going to write a lot of crap songs, like a lot, but you're going to get really good at writing songs. And then by having that little bit of input every week or something, every few days, of something new that you're working to develop, and you get good at feeling that into what you're working on, you're going to be expanding your capability as a creative. So that's my thought there. So I think anyone who's interested in what I just said there, I highly recommend checking out The War of Art. Fantastic book. And that's where I'll leave that one there for Wade you to add.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I have an example more than anything. Like, I actually did this once and it made me way better at what I do. And it's one of those things. So when I was deep in graphic design, like right in the thick of my career as a graphic designer and web designer, before I started getting more into web design, less into graphic design, and then now YouTube, is probably about 10 years ago, I saw someone was doing a design a logo a day challenge, and anyone who's a graphic designer will probably scoff at that straight away because it takes more than a day to design a really good logo. And in many ways, I agree and disagree. Some logos don't need to be like so well researched, and like, a lot do, but some don't. For example, if you got a guy who has a mowing business, you don't need to spend $2,000 crafting the perfect logo. You can come up with something basic that he can use pretty quickly. And then if he becomes a multi-international chain, then worry about it. But anyway, getting off topic, I decided to try this 30 logos in 30 days thing. And most of them were complete garbage. Even though I was pretty good at designing logos back then, and I'd already designed several logos, the time pressure meant that most of them were not great. But they were all simple. They all had bits and pieces of the logo sort of like checklist to make it a good logo, but they just weren't good because I was doing one a day every day, and I didn't have all day to do them. I was working. And I even posted it. I posted it online as a challenge, and I got so much blowback from other designers. Some people kind of came to my defense as well. And I'm like, it's a challenge. It's not supposed to be like this perfect thing. But for one, I got so much better at exercising my brain to do certain concepts of the logo process that I did get better and faster at it. And on top of that, the feedback I got from people actually helped as well. Even the angry feedback, because you go, okay, this is what other professionals in my field value and say that are important with logos. So even though I could design a good logo, I got so much better because, for one, I exercised that muscle in an extreme condition and did a poor job each time, but the muscle got stronger. And two, by actually showcasing it, I got some honest feedback from people, and I easily, within 6 months, got so much better because I had all these new concepts floating around in my head that slowly developed while I was working.
Yeah, there you go. The system works, Wade. The system works.
Yep. You can't be too precious and perfectionist about what you do. And that's the thing. Like, as someone who works in the AI, I talk about AI art a lot on my channel. It's one of the big things about my channel. But the human creativity and human art, it's the little imperfections that make it work.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I've had experiences in the studio where you're working on something and something will happen that was not intended. It was an accident. Like, someone just played something that was not on the script or on the chart, or there was some feedback through a speaker or something. And it just fitted. It was just like, wow, okay, that's cool. Like, you just couldn't have come up with that.
Actually, here's a tidbit for the audience. This is why I think you've got such a good mind for creative art. So Ryan's dad was an art teacher. And anyone asked me who my favorite art teacher was, I'll always go, it was Mr. White, who's Ryan's dad, because he was a teacher at my school. Story about that. We had to paint an Egyptian-looking face, I think it was. I can't remember. But I'd painted this Egyptian face in art once. And it looked flat, and I had no idea why. And so Ryan's dad, Peter, he comes along, and he goes, here's what I would do if you don't mind. So I said, yeah, you go for it. And he drew highlights on the nose and in certain areas, and all of a sudden it gave it dimension. And I couldn't figure out why it worked. It just did. And I still remember to this day, over the years, I slowly put the pieces together, and I had this very precise example of the way the nose was highlighted on this painting that I realized when you see a face, we see the skin color. But if you're an actual artist visually, like I'm looking at Ryan's face right now while we're talking. I can see there's highlights on one side of his nose and his face, and I can see shadow under his eyes. And there's actually quite a lot of contrast to create that depth. So little things like that, it's just like, why does that work? And my brain was trying to solve the problem for years because I was still only 14 or something at the time, and I could draw quite well, but painting wasn't my thing. So the idea of, you just have to get in and do things, and also be around other creative people as well really helps.
Yeah, that's a massive one. That's massive. Like, because you get, especially if they're people you respect and enjoy working with, if you get in a room with someone that you really enjoy and they've got their own ideas, and you're going to create something that you would never have come up with on your own. And I particularly find that musically at the moment, like it would take a lot for me to want to do a full music project that was my own, where I'm doing the whole thing from start to finish, like writing, arranging, producing. Like, it's fun to make music with people, man, and make art with people, collaborate.
Yeah. I hear you 100%. Like, the idea of working with other people, it's a big deal. Now, I just want to mention this quickly. If anyone's listening, if you hear any noises, someone has come up and started mowing my lawn. So let's hope that doesn't infiltrate the podcast too much before we get into more of these concepts.
Yeah, word. I guess one thing if we jump into probably the last concept we'll have time for today is we spoke about contrast previously, and I was fascinated because it's something I think of a lot just as a concept for making music. But you were talking about it from a visual art perspective, and I was just like, because I feel it's like a universal concept of creating something or making something.
Absolutely. To really illustrate the idea straight away, if you just start with a black and white image, and I'm not talking about line work on a white piece of paper, but something that's equal parts black and white, that's an interesting image straight away. And I'm going to kind of grow from there. I'm someone who likes to listen to a lot of heavy metal, and I've heard a couple of bands have mixed techno with heavy metal, and they kind of don't go together, but they do, if you know what I mean. Like, it created a different sound for me, and mixing certain types of sound that are contrasting works as well. So I look at the idea of there's also color contrast, where it's like, okay, I can have like a colorful background and a black and white person in it, and that's an interesting picture. Or the idea that if you take something that is, we'll talk about it before, but something that's very serious with something that's comical. So like, if you ever watched Terminator 3, this actually bugged me about this movie, by the way, but at the start, Arnie arrives as the Terminator and he's very serious. And he walks in to, do the usual thing, which is beat up a bunch of people and steal their clothes, which in Terminator 2 he did. Very serious, really cool scene. In Terminator 3, he walks in and there's a guy stripping. And he's like, talk to the hand and all this kind of stuff. And he ends up stealing the guy's clothes. And then he puts on these sunglasses. They're either like love hearts or stars or something. And don't get me wrong, it's funny. But that idea of mixing concepts, I think they tried to do there. I just don't think it was successful in that particular instance. But if you take something like a dog and put it in a business suit, because dogs are kind of silly and playful, and you put it in a business suit and make a serious portrait, then you've got something that's serious with something silly in there, and you've created contrast in the subjects.
You've created a boss dog. That's what you've created.
Yeah. Just like any dog in your house, you have to do all this stuff. Like,
but yeah, because I think with contrast, the way for me, it's almost like I can look at any piece of music that moves me, and I can find elements of contrast in it. Because if you look at it from the perspective that we started out from a storytelling perspective, like for a story to maintain its hold or its grasp on a listener or a viewer or whatever, there has to be ebbs and flows in the story. There has to be tension and release. It has to be building to some point. There has to be anticipation. And that it has to have something that holds the person's interest in a nutshell. Like from a musical perspective, contrast can be, you can find it in great pieces of music. And there's also, you can use it as an idea to generate, like you were talking about, like taking two things, but it works on the micro level and the macro level as well. I'll give you some examples. Like say you've got a chord progression to a song and you've got your sections of your song, which are your verse and your chorus. You might have your verse, which is a progression revolving around a major key center, right? To create contrast to the listener, because you want to show them that there's something different popping up, you can go, okay, I'm going to revolve the chorus around minor chords. So there's a subtle difference. There's a subtle contrast there. From an arrangement perspective, you could have a vocal melody that's going up. Like a really classic example of something like this is, do you know Paranoid Android by Radiohead?
Oh, I'm not super familiar with the song, but I know who you're talking about.
Okay, so the guitar line is descending. So it's going down. The vocal melody is ascending. So they never get in each other's way because they're two contrasting elements. And you can use it with static, like there's so many, it's limitless. Static, like chord progressions that are based around one key center, or chord progressions where you've got lots of different changes. You can use it rhythms. It goes, I'll go on forever. You can use contrast to create any idea, from a busy drum beat to a sparse drum beat, to busy vocals to sparse vocals, like ascending, descending textures. Like it's never ending.
I would love to hear your thought on this, since you're in music and I'm not, right? So have you listened to much Tool in your time?
Yeah, I love Tool. Tool are awesome.
There's a lot of songs that I have noticed, not all of them. I love the way they start off kind of low energy and slow, and they kind of build the rhythm and the energy, and to the point where it almost climaxes at the end. And I love the way it's not just like this verse, chorus, and then you've got like that, I don't know what it's called, 3/4 way through the song, then you get one more verse, one more chorus, and it's over.
A bridge.
There you go, yeah. Whereas there's a song called Right Into by Tool, which I love, and it starts off so slow and easy. And the way that it builds, all of a sudden you realize that the song's going off at the end, and you haven't even noticed. It's gone from this really slow, peaceful song to like metal rock at the end, and then it just builds and builds, and then right at the end it just climaxes and ends. I love the way they take the formula of the song, and they quite often will do that contrast where it's, or even Parabola is completely different, where it's like really, really quiet, and then all of a sudden, bam, the second half of the song is, full
builds
metal.
up to it.
Yeah.
Like their music's amazing, because their music is what I find remarkable about their music is it's dense. Like, and when I say dense, it's dense conceptually. Like, there's a lot of concepts going on, a lot of like which you could look at as like intellectual ideas of how to make music or generate ideas. And this Tool and Radiohead, I'd sort of put in this category as well, is they make music which is what I'd call asymmetrical, where they'll have different time signatures. It's not like you were talking about before, like introduction, like 16 bars of a verse, 8-bar chorus, 8-bar bridge, like the same formula. They make things they make art, which is music, which is found, like you could say, is found in nature. A tree grows a certain way, it comes off a little bit this way, but it feels natural, their music. It doesn't feel like it's conceptually driven a lot of the time, which I think is like I feel absorbed in the story of the song, and you're along for the ride, as opposed to going, oh yeah, I love this 6/4 15/8 time signature, and the guitar's doing, like, I don't care, because I'm just so absorbed in the song. And that's what I admire about their music as well. But like, I love that storytelling, like songs like Eulogy, like I think there's 46 and 2, they've all got this this amazing build, and it's like it's every song's a journey.
100%. There's the energy has an almost emotional response, I feel, when I listen to it. That's one of the reasons I always come back to them. But have you noticed they use contrast in comedy a lot as well? Like, if you think about, there's two different things you can look at, right? So say you've got Anchorman, these are two comedy movies from when we were younger. I'm going to cover, like, Anchorman. In comedy, it's like you got someone who's very serious, a news anchor, and you throw a really silly dude like Will Ferrell in there, and he's completely incompetent but completely overconfident. So you got, within the character, you got a contrast, and that character is a contrast to the setting. Whereas you take Zoolander, right? Similar movie, same time frame, similar act, like same actors pretty much. But Zoolander, instead of being a contrast of difference, they've taken the contrast of these beautiful people who are often, look, this is not me saying this, but they're portrayed as being not the smartest in the media quite often. So you've taken this guy, and they've taken the two contrasts of what we see as a superior physical form, beautiful person who's not intelligent, and they've taken those two contrasts and gone, let's make them so they're beautiful but completely stupid. And then you got Zoolander, who just is the stupidest dude you've ever seen, but is this highly successful, beautiful male model who everyone respects. And the idea that they inject contrast into comedy, I've noticed in a lot of jokes too. There's so much contrast in so many aspects of media, performance, art. It's everywhere if you look for it.
Yeah, and that's probably like I remember when I was first told about it, like, for example, the Beatles' music is just chock full of contrast. It's ridiculous. Like, I think that's one of the reasons why their music has stood the test of time, on top of just being really good storytelling. But yeah, like I think that's something people can look out for, man, is the contrast. Like look out for that in art that you like and start looking for those elements as a concept and then looking at how you can integrate that into your creative processes. But man, I think we should probably we could go on for hours talking about this stuff, but we should probably wrap this one up because I think we could definitely make more podcasts about other concepts that we could get into. But is there anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
So maybe there's a little bit of a little bit of a summary on my end, which is obviously creativity, the idea of exercising the muscle, trying to be creative, but also trying to focus on expression and thinking of concepts like contrast. If someone shows you a picture of something, it's like, okay, what contrast can I add to that to make it unique? Also, the idea of limitation. If someone gives you a limitation, how can I do something different? And I know that quickly before I spoke about graphic design having a flyer where something grabs attention, educates, and then there's a call to action to sort of call the person or whatever. So the formula would be title at the top, information in the middle, call to action at the bottom. How can you achieve the same thing by looking at that formula and doing something completely different? And then, of course, how can you take the limitation of a format and go, well, how can I step outside that limitation? So finding concepts and going, okay, what's a contrast? What's something I can do with this concept that is completely different from what we see everywhere else? And applying that to your thought process and then doing things like that on purpose to exercise that muscle is what I think could create some great creativity.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. You hit the nail on the head. Those two things where we've spoken about our own perspectives on the creative process and what creativity's been for us in experience, but also, yeah, that constantly just doing to sort of build your skills, but also get that creative muscle working. So there's a million more things we could jump into, which will probably make future episodes about I Dare Say Wade. But
let's do that.
Yeah,
future episodes.
For sure. Future episodes. But all right, man, where can the good people find you, young Wade?
Just search for Creator Impact. I've got a website, creatoриmpact.com. Otherwise, I'm on YouTube, Instagram, X, Twitter, Facebook. They're the same thing. You know what I mean? I'm on all those. What about you,
I just want to say, did you want to plug the lawn mowing man?
Oh, yeah. So Dan's Law Care, he's actually really good. So, yeah, look for Dan's. Oh, actually, that's not his actual name. Good old Dan. Look him up.
Yeah, good bloke. All right, if anyone's interested in checking out any of my wares, you can find my website at www.hpmguitar.com or the YouTube channel, which is just at hpmguitar. If you've got any questions or feedback from today's episode, leave those in the comments or get in touch with us via social media or YouTube, and we will catch up with you people in the following episodes. Until then.
Thanks for listening. Peace.